I'm happy to be with you this evening. Photo Israel is a non-profit organization established in Israel in 2012 to realize our social vision of creating a better society through the language of photography, of social activity, and of creating a dialogue between art and different communities in Israel. We believe that photography is a universal language that reaches across all cultures and genders to be understood by all. A language that allows for building bridges between central and remote areas and between unprivileged communities and the general public. This session is called Environmental Transformation, Changes Through Photography. This evening, we will hear talks by photographer Eddo Hartmann, who will talk about his project, The Collective Landscape, which is exhibited in a solo exhibition at the festival with the collaboration of the Netherlands Embassy in Israel. Our second talk will be by photographers Mathias Braschler and Monika Fischer, who will talk about their project, The Human Face of Climate Change, that is exhibited in an exhibition by the same name at the festival, in collaboration with the Switzerland Embassy in Israel. At the end of both talks, we will have a short Q&A session. So thank you all for joining us this evening. I would like to start and present our first speaker, Eddo Hartmann. Eddo Hartmann is an Amsterdam-based photographer, artist, and educator. He graduated with distinction from the Department of Photography at the Royal Academy of the Art at The Hague. His works was exhibited in various galleries and museums, including the Lumiere Brothers in Moscow, Museum Dr. Gerstein in Ghent, the Seoul Museum of Art, CAFA Beijing, and the Oi Marseille in Amsterdam. So, Eddo, the stage is yours. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm very happy that I could be part of this presentation. It's good to see everybody like this around. First of all, I would like to thank everybody from Photo Israel to make this possible in this unfortunate situation, but I think it's a great event and I'm very happy to be here and I'm very proud that I can be one of the speakers on this evening. I already got a very nice introduction. But before I share some of my works, I want to say a few more things to introduce a bit more to get a full understanding of my work at the moment. I used to travel quite a lot around to document specific stories all over the world. One of my last big projects was done in North Korea. I made a book and had a very big exhibition in several countries. But after traveling around, I felt the notion, I had the idea, maybe I could document some interesting things close to home. And this project I want to share with you right now. So I will, okay. Okay. The project I want to share with you is called The Collective Landscape. I started it a few years ago, and I started it because I got an invitation from the University of Groningen, and they asked me to document the work of the scientists and the work, especially the work they do in the Dutch landscape. In the beginning, I had a lot of doubt about this project because, to be very honest, the Netherlands is very flat, and I thought it was a bit boring. So I think, how could I make landscape photography within the Netherlands more interesting? And I talked with different scientists and I came to the conclusion that it was a subject actually more engaging and more interesting than I ever could think. And that's so close to home. What did I do? I followed different scientists who do research, field research in the flatlands of the Netherlands, and they use all kinds of equipment to do this. And while shooting this series, I was confronted with a big problem. For instance, this scientist, this is one of the first pictures I took during this series, and he was able to show me details in the landscape that I didn't have noticed before. So you have to imagine that all these different scientists I followed became my guides in the Netherlands, and they let me see the country in a different light. And I was a bit surprised and also a bit concerned because it wasn't so positive then as I thought. Let's go to the next one. If I have another, yes, here it is. So what is happening? I learned from those scientists that actually the Netherlands are the second greatest exporter of arable stuff. So vegetables, all things that grow on the land. They're the second biggest producer after the US. So imagine such a tiny land that produces so much food for the rest of the world. And it comes at a cost. And just after the war, every Dutch farmer was pushed to use a lot of innovation and a lot of technique to get the most out of his country. But unfortunately, we're now in a point in history that we cannot push the land any further. We have lots of problems with biodiversity, but there are some farmers who do it differently. This picture you see here is made on the field of a farmer who's really concerned. He has just a regular farm, but he was trying to find new ways of farming that was far more inclusive than the normal farming. So what he did, instead of having a monoculture on his fields, he placed long stripes of natural vegetation, long margins through the fields. For a normal farmer, it's actually pretty hard to do because it makes his farming more complicated. But by doing this, he will attract all kinds of insects and birds and all kinds of different species that yet again will eat other insects to actually get a new balance in the ecosystem. And just having a few of these margins within his fields makes it happen that he doesn't need any pesticides anymore. So you have to imagine me as a 100% urban person, travels to the country and actually never paid attention and slowly learned that the state of the Dutch landscape is pretty bad. And then I learned from the scientists and the farmers what could be done to reverse the tide of the loss of biodiversity. So I have to see if I can launch a new page for you. New picture, yes. So this is one of the scientists who helped me to see the country in a different way. He has a strange coat on, but he's actually, at this moment, when I took the picture, he's in a big greenhouse and they kind of do research on seeds that are originally not from Holland. So actually the seeds are in quarantine, so they shouldn't go anywhere else. His name is Han Olf, and he was actually one of my main guides. He's a professor at the University of Groningen, and he's an ecologist. And although we have a lot of negative stories about biodiversity, the loss of biodiversity within Holland, he also had some positive information. So this is the map of Holland. Probably you know it already, but we probably also have a lot of international guests, so I just have to show the country. And you see, we have lots of rivers and lots of water. And specifically look in the middle, we have a kind of big lake in the middle of Holland, and it was closed off in the 30s. It used to be an open connection to sea. By closing it up, it went very turbid and it went into sweet water, and actually all the animals died. There was a big change in the ecosystem right there. And it didn't really tend to it for a long time. At that time, the Dutch were more interested in making land out of water. And everybody knows that the Dutch are very good at this. So within this big lake, you see also these big islands. And that is one of the islands we built as lands. But if we zoom in a bit, recently they made new islands, and these are called the Mark and Water. So I just zoomed in on the pictures, and actually it's a new ecosystem. So instead of hiring these land makers to make a new island in Dubai, which they do. They hired them, the Dutch government hired them to put a big island within this lake to recreate biodiversity. And I went to this island several times, and it's incredible that in a few years, a new ecosystem is born over there. So this is also a way of giving back nature to taking back nature to the land, so and creating new biodiversity. He also showed me other research that is done, and some of these research are called exclosure experiments. What they do in a landscape, they put a fence, and maybe they keep that fence for 40, 50, 60 years, and then they see how the nature within this fence develops differently out of the fence. Because you have to do research over a very long time to see what's actually happening. This fence was pretty much not visible. So if you walk there, you won't see it. So I decided to literally take my lighting equipment and to light these areas up. So you really could see where the research was done. And I was also very happy that the researchers themselves really liked it. I made different versions of this theme. So that means that meant that I went usually in relatively remote areas within Holland as far as that's possible, and to put these lights here to just mark where research was done. I just said we have a lot of water in the Netherlands, and also I did a lot of images in the Wadden Sea. And the Wadden Sea is this big water area just above Holland with all the small islands you just saw before in the map. And this area is really, really unique. And it is even more unique since I've talked to, for instance, those two scientists who are actively working day and night in this area. Because the Wadden Sea is actually, you could say, it's like a restaurant for migrating birds. So it's kind of the biggest road restaurant you can have for migrating birds. So if you do research on these birds in this area, you really get a good idea from what's happening on a global level. That's why the UNESCO also made it a special reserve. These are some pictures from some time ago on these newly made islands. And here you see it's quite barren and empty. And I visit this place a few weeks later, and a half year later, and a year later, and slowly the vegetation comes. And within a few years, it completely took it over. I am very much interested in seeing research equipment in a landscape, because usually if you're not a scientist, you don't know what it does, but you get curious. And I very much got curious when I saw this. So in cooperation with different scientists within Holland from different institutes and different universities, I asked them, okay, do you have a certain research within Holland that needs certain kind of equipment? Because that will evoke questions. And through these questions and through these pictures, we can maybe answer some of those. This is one of my favorite machines I found on the beach, made by several scientists. And this is a sand collector. And this sand collector has a kind of shape of a sail, and it will move through the winds. And by collecting these little sand particles, but also little particles of vegetations in different parts, they really can see what the biodiversity is at that moment at that island. And at a certain point for me, it's, you know how I started out this little talk, that I was so much interested in everything abroad and exciting stories. And I just found a very exhilarating story just at the doorstep of my home. We also do kind of recreation of the Wadden Sea indoors. So this is a place, a very unique place on the island of Texel in the north of Holland. And this is the only research lab that could recreate the Wadden Sea indoors. So they have birds in there. And you know what I told you about, that this big restaurant of Holland, where all the migrating birds will fly around and eat. They can they can, I see some stuff on my screen now, but I have to continue. They can recreate the valency stuff indoors, and it can even do more research. They use floating homes for day and night research, which is quite strange when you have a little rubber boat and it's very cold and wet and it's just emptiness. In the far distance, you see this floating home with all kinds of scientists. It almost felt for me like a polar expedition, but it wasn't cold, it was just very wet. So I just continue like this, Yara? How am I doing in time?
I think you have something like 5 more minutes.
Good to know, but because otherwise I keep talking. Sometimes it's good, but sometimes it's not so good for the other guests. Okay,
no,
we'll continue.
Great. Please continue.
Okay. I really enjoy it again when I see it. So it's a very good life to be a photographer. My mother used to be jealous because she thought, I want to be a photographer. She never was, but she created one. So at least she did something about this art thing. This was also a location in the Wadden Sea. And these nets are used for catching birds, one of those migration birds, and testing them on their behavior in this lab area I just showed you before. This is another, when I found it or when I saw the landscape, it looked a bit kind of plasticky and a bit not very professional. I think, how did they do it? But actually it functioned very well. And in this little tent, there are also birds tested. They put little birds in there and they really monitor them, how adventurous they are, because birds have different characters. And only the most adventurous ones, they gave little transmitters so they could follow them. So those transmitters are very expensive. So imagine you put a transmitter on a very dull bird, so it won't fly away, so you have no data. So this was a tool to select those birds, the ones that would be interesting. This is one of the farmers. Slowly, I also started to do some portraits because I felt that I also wanted to meet and see those people that did all those things. And this is one of those farmers, one of the few who is doing all kinds of experiments on his lands to make his farming more, inclusive. I just saw some more images from objects I found by which were put down there by scientists. So this is a malaise trap. This is a kind of catching device to catch insects. And also with this information, you get far better idea what's actually happening right now with all those ecosystems. Let's see what I have more for you. So, I think this is it for me, because otherwise I keep talking. Once again, I'm very happy that I could be part of this panel right now, and I'm very looking forward to the other speakers. This is still a work in progress, and it is also very stimulating for me that like the embassy, the Dutch embassy was interested to show this work at Photo Israel, because although there's a lot of negative news about the decline of all these biodiversity stuff, but there's also hope. And through this scientists, I also learned that there are many very innovative ideas to turn the tide of biodiversity. So it's not all negative, there's still positive things are coming. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eddo. It was fascinating. I saw your exhibition and read your text, and it's not the same as listening to you and understanding much better all the project. And it really made me like, I really am waiting for the skies to open again, and I would like to come and visit and see all this. And
you're always welcome. And I love to hear the response of the viewers of the work in Tel Aviv.
Yeah, and I want to thank you for finishing with a sign of hope at this.
Sometimes you need it,
and
especially
yeah,
these
hope
times.
is needed. So thank you for that.
You're welcome.
And now, as I said before, we will finish after the second talk. We will have another the Q&A session. So if someone in the audience have questions, you can write them already. And I will skip directly to our second speakers. I would like to present Mathias Braschler and Monika Fischer. Mathias Braschler and Monika Fischer are a highly respected, internationally active team of photographers who began collaborating in 2003. Since then, they have specialized in elaborate projects documenting people from all backgrounds and cultures. For their projects and clients, they have been traveling the world for many years and have not only worked in metropolises like New York, Beijing, or Sydney, but also in remote corners like the island state Kiribati and Everest Base Camp. The spectrum of people who have stood in front of their camera ranges from stars like Roger Federer to nomadic farmers who have never been photographed before. Braschler and Fischer have won numerous awards for their image making, including the World Press Photo Award, the Hansel Myth Prize, and the European Publishing Award. Their photography projects have been appeared in countless international magazines, been published as book photos, and have been exhibited in galleries and museums in Europe, Asia, and the United States. So, Mathias and Monika, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Yara. Thank you. It's a pleasure being a part of this. Thank you very much to the team in Israel, to Yara, thank you so much for your curating this show, and thanks to the Swiss Embassy who made it possible that we could be, at least with the exhibition in Israel. We would love to be there as well, but it's wonderful that at least in this way we can meet you all and talk about this project.
So we did this project, Human Face of Climate Change, and we got motivated to do this project while we were doing another project in China. We traveled for several months in China, doing basically shooting portrait Chinese from all over the country. And this basically, that's not fog, that's smog. That was like a typical Chinese morning in a big city in China. And we just saw firsthand what just the economy and just people and what we are doing to our planet. And we were traveling China, we were wondering, what can we do? And we decided we want to do a work that focuses on climate change, just makes visible what happens with our climate and how it affects people. So the first thing we had to do, of course, we had to do a lot of research. That was key. I mean, for several months, we're just researching, we're reading the ICCCP report. We just had to get the facts straight. We had to know where to go. And we were lucky enough that we also met Cristiana Figueres, the former General Secretary, the former UNFCCC General Secretary. She's like the head person of the United Nations for climate change. And she told us why it matters and why we have to do this work. You can listen to her and find out why we finally decided to do this project.
It matters because it's the most important topic that is affecting the quality of life of every single human being alive today and every single human being alive tomorrow and beyond. There is no other unifying topic in the world that has as deep an impact on the quality of life of this planet as climate change. As simple as that.
Well, 2009, when we started this project, was not that as simple as that. A lot of people were denying that climate change is happening. We had so many fights. I mean, we were doing research, we met experts, we talked with them. We made out 16 countries that we wanted to visit with different types of climate change problems. We wanted to show it globally. So here you can see where we started to travel. We needed two Swiss passports. So we had one always in an embassy to get a new visa, and the other one for traveling. Thanks.
Now, our first destination was Australia. So in January 2009, we went to Australia. It happened to be that the second day that we were in Australia was the hottest day on record in Australia since they did measurements 150 years ago. And of course, that record has been shattered several times in between. We met Michael Fischer, This used to be he was a dairy farmer. He had 400 heads of cattle. This was basically the lake he got the water from. And as you can see, there's no more water. So he had to sell all the cattle he had, and was just praying that the rain would come back, that the water would come back, that he can start working again as a dairy farmer.
Then we also had to, we were lucky enough to travel to Kiribati. It looks like paradise. It's wonderful. We were on islands where they still don't have any electricity, but they live off fish and the vegetable they grow. They have the sweet water on the island. And with the heavier, storm activity, a lot of their islands are eroding at the moment. So also this family that we met, they said before their houses were way out in the sea out there, and their island, their paradise is vanishing.
The average, the maximum height of Kiribati is 1.5 meter. So of course, climate change is a huge, huge topic for them. Kiribati is like in the middle between Australia and Hawaii. And particularly for the young people there, their culture is being lost. They tried to build, like in one of these atolls, like a seawall to protect the island. But as we said, it's not just the sea that's rising, that's a problem, it's the storm activity that's becoming more intense with climate change. So that seawall to protect our island was destroyed in a very, very short time. So the young people from Kiribati, they know they have no future really. And the government of Kiribati made a contract with Australia that people have the option to leave and to start a new life. But that also means that, of course, culture is being lost.
This is in China. We were driving with an SUV through the desert, and we met this man walking through the desert in a sandstorm, actually. And what we always did, we did video interviews with the people. It's not just the pictures. For us, it's always important to give the people a voice. So we are photographers, yes. We take pictures, but at the same time, we also do interviews with the people. And he told us that exactly here, when he was a boy, they had watermelon fields. So they had lots of water. They have watermelons growing here. And in his lifetime, it has changed so much. The acceleration of change, that's the problem in climate change. It's how fast it's changing. How do you adapt?
China is quite heavily affected by climate change in different scales, in different areas. Like in the south, they have more floods, more rain, heavy participation events, more rain in a very short time. That's one of the things that's happening. This couple, they lost everything in a huge flood. And they told us, like in their lifetime, they've only seen one flood before. It was only remotely close to that. And they say it's becoming more and more these flood problems.
Here we are in Yakutsk with Avetik and his wife and his daughter. She's 5 years old. She's not a giant. What's happening here is permafrost is melting, and people living in these older houses, their houses are actually sinking into the permafrost. So if they wouldn't build new floors, they would wade in water in their houses. So that's why they build every year a new floor, and that's why they seem to be so big. Their problem is, it's also a problem of wealth. People who cannot afford to move to other houses, of course they adapt also in Yakutsk. There be stelts where people, houses are built on poles because they know permafrost is melting, but people who cannot afford to move to another house, that's the people who end up living in these conditions then.
The first people that are really affected by climate change are the poor, of course, the poorest of the poor. This was in Bangladesh, in Gabura, in southern Bangladesh. And here, what happened was quite tragic. She is a tiger widow. So you might wonder, what has a tiger to do with climate change? Here it's quite simple. Gabura is inundated by salt water over and over again. There are more floods, there's more storms. And so these poor farmers, they have more and more problems to grow the crops they need to survive. So what happens is the husbands, the men, they go over to the Sundarban National Park. That's the green line you see in the back far away. The Sundarban National Park is a tiger habitat. These people go in desperation over there just to collect resources, that they have something to eat. Of course, when you go in there, the tigers, they defend their territory. And her husband got killed 7 days before we shot this photo, exactly like that. Gamura has 5,000 people living on the island, and there's 300 tiger widows.
The moment we took her portrait in the island, there were 300 tiger widows.
And of course, like a lot of people, finally, they just have to escape the situation they're living in. And in Bangladesh, in Dhaka, the capital, you have about 3 million people that are living in slums. The government, they estimate that about half of these 3 million are climate refugees, like this woman who told us how she lost all her land because of erosion and storms.
Here in Ladakh, in India, actually it was not so easy for us to go to India, explaining that it's about climate change. That has changed in the meantime as well, but that was like 10 years ago, it was a problem to say it's climate change, and we come to India about this subject. And here in Ladakh, we met this family. It's about flash floods here. They lost their house. Of course, they have to build the houses closer to the water where they can grow vegetables, they can grow something to live off. It's a cold desert, and there's no way the ground doesn't absorb the water as well. So when it's raining, the water runs off, and it's raining much harder. The events are much more intense.
I mean, that might be something that many of you have observed in the last 10, 15 years, that there are more of these heavy precipitation events, that you have rain that becomes much, much more intense. We also observed that in Switzerland quite a lot, in Central Europe, and that's also one of the things that was already described 20 years ago by experts about climate change. This is something that's probably going to happen. Here we are in Colorado. The trees you see in the back, these are basically fir, and they are not supposed to be red. What happens, it's the pine beetle problem. It got warmer in Colorado in the Rocky Mountains, which leads to pine beetles that are attacking these trees. They used to die in the wintertime because it was very, very cold. Now it's too warm, they don't die anymore. The trees, they had like a mechanism to defend themselves. They basically drowned the pine beetles, but since it's not only got warmer, it also got drier. They don't have enough sap to drown the pine beetles, and massive swaths of forests are being destroyed by pine beetles in Colorado and in the Rocky Mountains right now, all the way up to Colorado.
This is a huge problem here, not just for the poorer people, but also for the richer. They build a lot of nice houses here in Colorado, in the Rocky Mountains. And he said he has to move away because it's way too dangerous to be caught in a forest like this with all this fire danger around him.
And of course, fire is a big topic. I mean, I'm sure you all heard about all these terrible forest fires, wildfires in California. This was the station fire. It was in 2009. It was a fire close to LA, which has raged through the mountains, destroyed a lot of property. But if you look what happened the last 2 years, this was a relatively mild fire and becomes more and more of a problem. Firemen already told us 10 years ago, this becomes a major issue and they don't know how to tackle it anymore. California used to have 2 fire seasons. Now 11 months out of 12 months are fire season. And it becomes more and more problematic for people.
Newtok in Alaska was the first refugee, well, how do you say, a village that had to relocate. They were the first climate refugees in the United States, in North America, actually. And he's Grant Kashatok. He's the, how do you say, school principal. The principal, school principal. We went to visit them there. We went with a big plane, then a smaller one, and then even a smaller one, and the smallest landed then here in Newtok. And you really need rubber boots to walk around, or just everything is on this path where you can walk. It's permafrost melting and erosion as well. So they had to relocate their whole village to another place.
This is Cuba, hurricane activity. I don't know, maybe somebody, it's just quite fitting that we talk about this today, because today was the 29th hurricane of the Atlantic hurricane season. This is a new record. There was never, never more tropical storms in the Atlantic than this year. And this is a trend that's continuing. The storms getting stronger and there's more storms, which is quite logic. The water is getting warmer, the air is getting warmer. So these storms are getting more fierce. In Cuba, we visited quite a few villages that were hit heavily by hurricanes. And these people told us about, you know, the horror of being hit by a hurricane and losing everything.
In Peru. So when we traveled, we often worked with NGOs in place who helped us to get into this culture quickly and help us to meet the people. We located a place where we would go and take the picture and the problem, what is happening, climate change there. Of course, it's never just climate change. We have to say it's not a lab situation about climate change. It's always different factors, but we try to isolate where is climate change one of the main factors for the changes there. And here in the Andes, we worked with an NGO in the Parque de la Papa and Cusco, even higher. And we met Juliana Paco herding her llamas up there, sitting there. We wanted to show that the glaciers are melting. And we just saw her making wool like this, listening to a little radio and just herding her llamas. And we said, okay, we would like to take your portrait and talk about climate change and say, climate change, she didn't know what it is. And they're like, just, could you explain how is it changing around you? And the changes she explained to us, it's exactly what an expert of climate change would say. She didn't visit a school for one day and still she was the expert, like a scientist. Sorry, we're talking.
This is Miguel Torres, like in Spain. He's like the biggest winemaker in Spain. And he, from early on, he said, this is a huge problem because if the temperatures are rising, then our wines are changing. And so he researched a lot and he actually bought new estates in the foothills of the Pyrenees because he says, if I want to have the same type of wine, I have to go higher because where we have our vineyards, it's getting too warm. But he's not only talking about it. I mean, he's like a very wealthy, very successful entrepreneur in Spain, but he's very, very active if it comes to climate change. He only drives the Prius. He really adapted his whole winemaking to be more sustainable. And he's really a good example of how you kind of should move forward.
And also here in Switzerland, this is Christian. We met him in Grindelwald in Switzerland. And here, our glaciers are melting extremely fast. So when we were students, we already knew each other. We were on this glacier on an expedition when we studied geography, way, way back online. And this glacier was almost going down to the village. And he told us the house of his grandfather was here on this Alp, and everything got unstable when the glacier retreated. And when his grandfather was living here in the summer, they said when they were playing football, soccer, the ball would fall down on the glaciers. 5 minutes later, they were up with the ball again. And now it would take a day to retrieve their ball.
And basically what happened, the house tumbled down into the valley because everything destabilizes, because the glacier really stabilized the whole morena. And so he stands here in some remains of a corner of the house where he grew up. In Italy, it's one of the key factors also of climate change. It's not just the temperatures going higher, it's also more storm activity. This is in Basilicata in the south of Italy. He's like the beach guard. And he says they're having a lot of problems with the beaches just eroding away. So these sand beaches you can see in the back, they're just eroding away. So it's for tourism down there. It's really hard because they can't really do anything about it. And then we were also, of course, in Africa. We went to Mali and to Chad. This is like in the interior delta in Mali of the Niger River. And the Bozo, our nomadic fishermen, they go with the river and they travel with the river, and the lakes that are in the rain season, these lakes come they grow and they fish there. Now there's 35% less rainfall than there used to be. So their whole way of life is being disrupted. They say there's not enough fish. They can't travel anymore because the boats are getting stuck. There's not enough water. So their very, very old lifestyle that they lived for generations and generations is being destroyed right now because they can't keep on living as they used to do.
When we took her portrait, she told us that she actually would have 6 children, but she lost 3 children to diseases, to diarrhea actually, in the first year of their life. And her baby girl also already was sick, and she could only give her bottled water, which is very expensive there. So the water there is really, really bad, not just for us traveling there, also for the locals. And she says also the heat is affecting the children. It's difficult for them to learn. It's too hot to eat for the children, and the water is really poisonous.
This is also in Mali. It's another example how traditional lifestyle is being destroyed. These are the bozo, no, the peul, sorry. These are the peul. They're also nomadic herdsmen, and they had a way of life, how they worked together, how they subsided together with like the farmers that were just living on the land. And it used to be that the farmer living in the land, they cut their crops, and then the bozo came through with their animals, and the animals ate what was left. And they were living in harmony together because it all worked very well out for all of them. Now the situation changed because there's not enough rain, there's not enough crops. The farmers that are living in the land, the crops don't grow fast enough. The peul, they don't have food for the animals, so they come too early. So they invade the fields of the farmers, and you have conflicts. So there's also conflicts that are come out of climate change just because the way of life that these people lived for generations doesn't function anymore. And for them, it's hard just to adapt because that's just the way they live and they always used to live. And it's not so easy for them to adapt to these new realities.
Yeah, so we're throwing at you all these stories because we promised all these people we met, so we cannot do anything to help you on location there. Everybody was hopeful, but we said, what we can do as photographers, we can tell you a story. That's our responsibility. That's why we were also so happy to show this project in Israel. We really promised everybody we photographed to tell their story. So that's why you got all these stories now.
And we're just going to show you some making ofs because it was, of course, we heard a lot of tragic stories. It was not the easiest project to do, but we also received so much love from these people. People were really thankful.
They gave us this goat.
Yeah, actually, in Chad, they wanted to give us this goat as a present because they thought it was so cool that we came and listened to them and would tell their story. So the elder of the village came in the morning and said, this goat is for you, please take it along. And we had to explain them, you know, it's going to be hard in the plane. So really nice, but we're certain we're going to take good care of this goat. But so we also on this travel, it was really, we saw so many people from so many cultures, and we experienced so much really positiveness and wonderful people. And we are causing climate change, but we also, a lot of people are affected, a lot of people that don't have the possibilities we have to adapt. And therefore, we also learned at this trip, it is important for all of us that we try just to change our ways, you know, that these people that have a much harder time to adapt to these new realities can also live a decent life.
So it was wonderful for us to see how people deal with these changes, with the effects, how resilient they are. They're losing culture, they're losing hopes, but still it was wonderful to meet all these people and see there is resilience and there's hope and people adapt. And it's a huge responsibility that we have. Of course, we are affected. We, in the last 10 years, we also here in Switzerland, in Europe, in the States, that the effects of climate change are catching up with us. But people out there are way more affected. The closer people live to nature, the faster they are affected. And it's also about climate justice. So.
Thank you very
That's our
much.
message. Thank you so much that we were able to tell you all these stories. Thanks to the embassy again, and thank you to Israel for giving us this opportunity.
Thank you so much, Monika and Mathias. And I want to take this opportunity also to thank you for this chance I had to curate your exhibition, which I'm so, it's like such a pity that you can't see because it's really beautiful. And it's so great that we had this opportunity this year in Photo Israel to have an exhibition that it's outside in the public sphere so everyone can enjoy. So I really hope so that next time when the skies are open, you'll be able to come. It was really fascinating to learn about your project. And now I would like to move to the Q&A session. And meanwhile, if the audience have time to, would like to write down the question, we already have some questions from the audience, but I would like to start. And I would like to start with a question for all three of you. Both of your projects make us think about the future, especially the problematic environmental future caused by humankind. I wanted to ask you if you think your projects can lead to a change in its field, even a slightest one, or maybe have you already witnessed some change your projects led to?
Yeah, I mean, we had a very interesting experience. We also go to schools, show this work to students, primary school, and we were in a school of a very well-off suburb of Zurich, and we talked to primary school kids about this work, and one kid told us that his father and him, they're such big fans of Chelsea, and they go every other weekend, they go to a game in London. And he just looked at us and he says, you know what, I think this is not such a great idea. We shouldn't do that. And I think these are really wonderful moments, you know, when we also went to other places, you know, school, particularly school children, like young, that you try to tell that. And if you just have a couple that think about what their actions do, it's fantastic. And that's really all that matters to us, really.
And I think also for us, I mean, climate change is there, but it's difficult in your daily life to think of it all the time and to adapt your life. Really, it's hard. We don't want to change, but I think even for us to look at the pictures then and then again, and I think we hope it's also the same for other people. It's a reminder. It's happening out there, even if we adapt and we try not to think of it. But yes, it is there.
Thank you. Eddo, do you have something to add? I would love to hear you about this question.
I'm not so vain that I think that my project will have some sort of effect, positive effect. Of course, you always hope, but I don't think that's possible. But what I do think that the accumulation of projects, all kinds of initiatives, in the end, will have an effect. At the moment, I'm also a professor at art school in The Hague, and I work with very young photographers, the ones that want to start out to be an artist or a photographer. And these people are like in their early 20s, and they talk in a quite different way about their environment in all kinds of levels than when I was younger. So I see when I talk to younger generation, there is certainly something going on. People are far more conscious than before. And once again, I'm a positive person. So I think that's also the only thing we have. You know, we can be very down, everything go bad, but I think we have to proceed. And we see all kinds of, we have the pandemic, that's also a big wake-up call. So in the long run, I think it will help, but I don't think my project in particular will do anything, but the accumulation of all these projects hopefully have a certain kind of effect.
I'm sure the awareness it will bring, and that can make a change, a certain change anyhow. Another question before I move to the audience questions. I've looked at the photos and you've created beautiful photography that deals with important and quite hard issues. So I wanted to ask if you think that the aesthetics of the photos can be an obstacle when trying to make a change through the medium.
In my opinion, it's quite the opposite, actually, because I feel like, you can show difficult situation and still you can give people, you can leave them their pride. You can show them in a beautiful way. And I feel also we try to go in there through a back door, because a lot of people, particularly in this day and age, you know, where you have like a lot of photography out there, and particularly a lot of photography also in the news and everywhere of tragedies, and people, I mean, I don't say they're tired of it, but maybe they just flip over it because there's so much of it and they've seen it, and this earthquake and this disaster, this hurricane. And so we try to show it differently to stop them, you know. It looks different, it's still a difficult topic, and maybe just to stop them in track of the magazine and kind of like, what is this, you know, why is this person photographed like this, and it's a tragic story. And in our experience so far, it seems to work.
Interesting. So thank you. There's a few questions from the audience. Here's one for Eddo. Is the lighting accessories in the pictures on purpose, or just showing the set used? If it's part of the composition, why?
I think that's a very good question. I'm also very happy that I just saw them coming in through Q&A. I searched for different kind of visual grammar to tell the story. And within my story, what I want to literally highlight is that scientists go into the fields and have experiments, and they use these experiments to collect data. So in some ways they change the situation, or in some ways they use a certain kind of equipment to monitor the whole thing. Sometimes this equipment is visible, sometimes it isn't, but they in some way only heard their kind of being there is already kind of change of the situation. And to make this clear, I put my own lights there to say, okay, here's something going on, and it is artificial. You can clearly see with the lighting. So in some ways, literally it's not invasive, because putting the light there for a few moments wouldn't really literally hurt the landscape itself or change it forever, but just highlighting at that certain point. So in that way I used kind of really kind of like a big finger pointing, okay, here's something happening, something artificial, and it also fitted the whole theme of the collective landscape idea, that everybody has his little part and wants to do something with it. There's a whole theory about it. There's also another question I saw about what about the research I do before I start a project. The research, like explained before by Monika and Mathias, is a very big thing. You have to start with a lot of research. And of course, I was joined by experts.
I just want to read the question out loud, so maybe some of the audience didn't read it. You're talking about, yeah, okay.
Yes,
so,
yes.
Can you tell us a bit more about the kind of researches you do when developing a project like this? Also, do you or would you include other data like lamps, graphics, etc. into your project when exhibiting, or you rather let the pictures speak?
Of course, you need a lot of, if you want to make a difference, there's so many photographers out there, there's so many things. I don't believe in just going out, take a picture and put it somewhere and say, okay, look at it. As a documentary photographer or artist, as you will, people can see and feel if there's some basic research as a base of the whole thing. So you really need to start with talking to people. Also, what was explained by Monika and Mathias is that it's a good research tool. I also did video interviews with researchers and farmers and other people that were part of this project. So I really could talk to them and learn a lot from it. So I just use any tool I can have for such a project. That's why it takes also so long. For this project, I'm already working there for 3 years. Monika and Mathias are working there already for more than 10 years. So for a good solid project like this, you really need not a lot of time to do all the necessary research and execution.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Now we have a question here for Monika and Mathias. And someone asking, how did you discover all those personal stories?
So we did a lot of research where to go but we didn't want to have people defined that we want to go and shoot before. So that would be like Google journalism. We call that Google journalism, like people go and take portraits of people that they already have seen in the medias. We wanted to go out there and see with our own eyes, and see the locations were important in that project as well. And then on location where we went, is it an island or a village in the area, we went and looked for people with stories. So how visual it is, it's important for us to see in the landscape what is happening, but also the people. So we spent a lot of time there with the people, talking with them. And often it was difficult to say, okay, it's only this story that we can do in this, because so many stories are out there and so many interesting looking people as well. So we had a lot of help of NGOs out there as well. We adapted the strategy in every country, actually. In Kiribati, we were on the road, on a boat, actually, together with the former Minister of Commerce. He had to go from island to island and introduce us to the elders of an island. You don't just go and land on an island and talk to anybody there. You go first, are introduced to the elders, and the elders bring you to the people. So the cultures in every place that we went was different, and we had to adapt how we go and talk to the people in every place that we went.
Wow, that sounds really fun and interesting. And unfortunately, our time is almost up. So I would like to ask one last question. There's a lot of questions. Unfortunately, I can't ask them all. I would like to ask maybe, wow, I'm so sorry I can't ask all the questions, but I will ask one last question and then we'll have to finish this session. Monika and Mathias, why did you choose to do this style of portraits? Why not combine portraits with various pictures? And why did you focus on portraiture? That's the question, and I'm sorry, and if you can do it quite shortly, it would be great.
Yeah, I mean, we are portrait photographers, and that's the way how we tell stories. And of course, we publish these photographs. These stories are always published in magazines because we reach a lot of people through magazines. And if we try to tell the stories with these portraits, of course, there's a way, as in the question asked, that you do a portrait and you have several other photographs to tell the story around. That can be very beautiful also in an artistic way. But if you want to tell a story on 10 pages in a magazine, it is nice to have these portraits that each portrait tells the story in itself. You have the person and you have the environment, and you combine the environment, the person, try to tell a story through that. But there's many different ways how you can tell these stories. And there's other photographers who produce beautiful projects about climate change, about the effect of climate change, but also about how people try to adapt, that are beautifully done, that are very different from ours. This is just our way, how we try to tell a story.
So we're specialized in these big projects where we take a series of portraits. It's not just one portrait telling a story, but all these stories come together to show a kaleidoscope. So that's why I say over here in our book, it was like 60 portraits of people from all continents, their picture and their statements together. So it's the portrait and a statement in their original way, how they said it.
Okay, so thank you very much. I really appreciate you joining us this evening. I want to thank our speakers, Monika, Matthew, and Eddo, and the Switzerland Embassy in Israel and the Embassy of the Netherlands in Israel for supporting this event. I want to thank Inbal Fera, who is with us this evening on the technical side and in charge of coordinating the festival's online content program. And I want to thank all you and the audience. So I invite you to come and listen to all our other events of the Photo Israel Festival online content program. Thank you very much and have a good evening. Hope to see you.
Thanks a lot.
So
Bye-bye.